Okay, hello and welcome. My name is Margit Bantowski. I am a Trillium Awakening teacher and transformative coach. And today is August 8th, 2020. And today's topic is Goddess Rising, the necessity of the feminine for all genders. And I'd like to begin by reading a poem. And this poem is from a colleague and student, fellow traveler on the Trillium Awakening path by the name of Dean Mott. And this poem is called Goddess Table. And I think I need my glasses to read it. And I invite you just to close your eyes just for a moment and let the poem sink in, and then we'll go from there. Let us sit with the goddess at her table. Sip her sweet honeyed nectar, steeping in her ambrosial love, until we are supple and savory as warm bread from heaven's oven. I'll read it again. Let us sit with the goddess at her table, sip her sweet honeyed nectar, steeping in her ambrosial love, until we are supple and savory as warm bread from heaven's oven. So thank you, Dean. And it means a lot to me that a man wrote that poem. And this inquiry around the divine feminine and the goddess has been with me for about a year now. Very powerful inquiry. Actually, I feel like it's taken me rather than I've been taking the inquiry. The inquiry has been taking me. And I'll begin by kind of zooming way out from the Trillium Awakening path's perspective. So Trillium Awakening emerged out of Samuel Bonder's work, which was then called Waking Down in Mutuality. And the essence of this path is, instead of just waking up and away from the mess of the world and our earthly challenges and delights, it's actually waking down, in and through, and in relationship. So the three petals of the trillium flower are consciousness, embodiment, and mutuality. So we include everything, all those dimensions of life. And in the Hindu tradition, there's the concept of Shakti and Shiva. Shakti being consciousness, which is the space, stillness, silence, emptiness, out of which everything manifests. And all that which manifests is called Shiva. Shakti. So Shiva is that ground, the spacious, empty ground. And then Shakti is everything from subtle energy all the way to dense matter. So the marriage of Shakti and Shiva, the marriage of the infinite space with material dimensions, that marriage is what our Trillium path is all about. That unification of spirit and matter. And so if we look at the material as the feminine, the three petals of the trillium are consciousness, which could be considered masculine in this frame, and embodiment and relatedness, which could be considered feminine aspects. So really this path has a tremendous amount of feminine in it. And what that means is, in order to engage this powerful process of embodied awakening, we also need to encounter not only personal challenges around accessing those more feminine aspects of self, but cultural interference with accessing those dimensions of our being. So once upon many, many, many thousands of years ago, some of the earliest civilizations were goddess-centric. They worshipped the ability to give life. That was seen as the ultimate power. The ability to give and nurture life was the absolute power in that frame, that worldview. And the body was sacred. The feminine body was sacred because that's where life came through. The earth was sacred because that gave form to life. And actually those early civilizations, and they were civilizations, not just hunter-gatherers, but they were actually cities and established villages. They were very egalitarian and minimal hierarchy. Of course, the women were very empowered to be mediaries with the spirit world, as were men, but not exclusively one or the other. And just to say that the feminine was deeply empowered and respected. And, you know, early agriculture was happening, the early crafts were happening. There was weaving and metalsmithing and art and ceramics and the beginnings of language, all in those early goddess-based cultures. And about 5,000 years ago, a big shift came in where the power to take life became dominant, and they were mostly basically patriarchal societies. And I don't want to say those early societies that were goddess-based were not matriarchal in the sense that the women were dominant. They were matrilineal in the sense that the lineage was from womb to womb to womb, but it wasn't a dominator society. It was a participatory and partnership society. So when these other cultures came in and actually wiped out the goddess cultures, it was patriarchal in the sense that it was male dominated and it was a hierarchical society. And the power, the central power of those societies was the power to take life and the power to dominate. So physical power and domination and the ability to take life were the force behind those cultures. And so what's happening now is there's a resurgence of the valuing of the feminine, and it gives us a doorway into these qualities of being that actually have been kind of pushed in the background for a long time. So before I go into sort of the more embodied aspects of the feminine, I want to first, again, go back to the sort of esoteric, spiritual, more absolute way of looking at it. So the Shakti Shiva, Shiva being the spacious, infinite, fundamental ground of being, and Shakti being the energetic manifestation. And I have here about 20 phrases from another Trillium teacher named Van Gwyn, who has been around a long time in this work, who's one of our most senior teachers. He's one of our elders. And I have a collection of his phrases. I invite you to close your eyes and just let yourself feel these are sort of the spiritual qualities of the divine feminine. And then we'll go into naming sort of the more earthly qualities of the divine feminine. So go ahead and close your eyes. Divine deliciousness. Sumptuous feast of manifest possibilities. Heart delights of Devi Ma. Spiritual aliveness. Mysterious beauty. Love permeation through all. Heart beauteous Devi Ma. Spirit permeation everywhere. The pregnant mystery. She who embraces the guts of life. She who turns herself inside out. Divine expression in profuse manifestation. Divine in loveness. Love aliveness. Radiant heart love. Bestower of heart bliss. Giver of divine grace and blessings. Answerer of heart prayers. Heart bliss intoxication. Magical grace magnifier. Bestower of divine vision and seeing. The divine is here in this. She who tastes and devours all the tastes of life. She whose heart embraces the pain of all beings. She who sings everywhere. She who worships her own creation. Maddening love for all as her. She who loves and serves others as the very divine in flesh form. She who delights and revels in our discovery of her as us. So that gives you sort of a sense of the most refined, sort of essential spiritual flavor of the divine feminine. And then we'll go into the more embodied characteristics of the divine feminine. I'll just say that this has been a long journey for me personally to make room for the feminine, acknowledge it in my own being. And it wasn't until about a year ago when I had in a deep meditative state, had a revelation about this divine feminine. It included these characteristics I just read to you. And I had this recognition that, oh, this is the potency of the feminine body too, as an archetype of that. So there, I grew up in a, very rational atheistic environment in our family. I studied engineering. I was a competitive athlete for decades and very, very skeptical of all spiritual things. So it's really quite ironic that I find myself in this position. It's been a long, long road. And I remember even in my late 20s, early 30s, going to a dance and dancing with this man who was my boyfriend at the time. And he had some serious moves. And I felt like a stick. like a stick insect trying to dance. And so there was this way that I was deeply dissociated, not only from my body, but especially from my femininity. And so this reclamation has been a huge process for me. And one of the ways I see the way the lack of the feminine in my own psyche, the valuing it in my own psyche, is that I have absences of empathy. Like some of the trauma from a patriarchal upbringing is these dead places where I can't feel empathy. And I notice it in my marriage, like, oh, there's a way that I get really impatient with some of my partner's vulnerabilities. So that absence of empathy is actually a clue to where I have gone numb, where I don't have, where the feminine, which is a normal thing in all humans, got tamped down, got frozen out. So I'm going to do a screen share. First, let me cue it up. Okay, and I am going to just go through some of the characteristics of the feminine. So now I'm going not just super transpersonal, dropping down more like in the goddess cultures and how that translated to immediate experience. So one of the characteristics that was deeply respected was cycles. So cycles of birth and death and regeneration, recognizing that death and regeneration were integral to life. The birth and death regeneration cycle was revered, respected, honored, recognized, as well as the seasons. So spring, summer, fall, winter, along with respecting those qualities of the feminine regarding cycles, comes with capacity for timing and patience, the knowing of gestation, the sensing for ripeness. So in patriarchal dominator cultures, cycles aren't really that honored. It's the drivenness, that's the power over, let's keep going, let's make it happen no matter what. Less respect for timing and ripeness. It's on, on the power dynamic, let's make it happen, that forcing. So cycles, timing, and patience. You may want to jot these down. I will have some questions for contemplation in a couple of minutes, so you might have a pen and paper handy, and you could jot down these characteristics because I'll have questions for you about them. So cycles, timing, and patience. So in addition to cycles and timing, sense of timing and ripeness and patience, another characteristics that was associated with the feminine is embodiment. And that includes our needs, the physical needs, food, water, shelter, our vulnerabilities. So in dominator societies, what's valued is the power over and brute power and strength. And then the characteristics of vulnerabilities and sensitivities are devalued. Emotions, fluids, and mess. So birth actually became a dirty thing, especially in Christian mythology. So the body and fluids and birth and blood became basically demonized and suppressed, along with messiness and fluids and chaos is the fear of not having control. So being open to chaos is a suppressed feminine quality. And along with the feminine body, the female body, that was devalued and suppressed and dominated, so also was the earth, associated with the feminine and became, property. something to be controlled and harvested and manipulated. So those are all, I put them all under the characteristics of embodiment. Other characteristics are compassion, empathy, the ability to feel another person, to have sympathy and compassion for another. And deeply connected to compassion is relationship. So the feminine attunement to other, the valuing of relationship, not just between humans, but between humans and the earth and our fellow more than human species. Reciprocity for its own sake, not reciprocity as a shell game. I'll give you this and you give me that as a trade deal, but reciprocity on its own terms for its own sake. And along with that is the, care of community. And a couple more here. Characteristics of the feminine: holding, the ability to welcome, create a welcoming space, receptivity, allowing, receiving, that embracing quality. And then also nurturing. So supporting life, attending to growth, cultivating, right? The plants and the children and each other. So attending to the growth, attending to the evolution of things, encouragement and trust. I have one more slide here. Another characteristic of the feminine could be seen as intuition, the subtle sensing based on deep interconnection. So in Western civilization, this rational mind is what's valued, the logic and reason and determining and categorizing and ranking. I'm not saying that, the masculine characteristics aren't important. They are. It's just that for 5,000 years, they've dominated the scene. And at what cost? At the cost of our ability to subtle sense into our collective field, at the cost of intuition and other forms of intelligence and knowing. So I'm sure I've left things out, and there could be things that could be argued about in here. But for the purpose of this exploration, let's just see how these characteristics, I'll review them really quickly. Cycles, timing and patience, embodiment, including not only our bodies and the earth. Oh, and sensuality and sexuality are part of embodiment too. Compassion, relationship, holding, nurturing, and intuition. So now I'm going to invite you to do some journaling. So if you're watching this as a video, you can push pause after the question and give yourself some time to write this down. So what aspects of the feminine were not welcomed in you when you were growing up? So maybe I think what we'll do, since I'm recording this at the same time and I cannot see how to pause the recording while I'm doing screen share. No, let me see. You can see my cursor. I can pause recording. Great, I figured it out. So here's a question for contemplation. What aspects of the feminine were not welcomed in you when you were growing up, in your family situation? In you particular, it could be the climate, but I would make it personal, inside yourself. So I'm going to pause the recording, and for those of you watching, you can pause and give yourself, like 3 minutes, 2 minutes to contemplate that question. Okay, go ahead and finish that last thought. And then the next question for contemplation is, what was the impact of this on you? What was the consequence of not having these aspects of your feminine nature welcomed? If you're watching this as a video, go ahead and push pause. So go ahead and finish your thought. And the next question is, what aspects of the feminine might be helpful for you to reclaim? What aspects of the feminine might be helpful for you to reclaim? Okay, and then wrapping up that question. The next question is, what might interfere or get in the way with your ability to access or reclaim these aspects of the feminine? What might make it hard or interfere with you reclaiming these aspects of the feminine in yourself? Okay, finishing your thought on that question. We have 2 more questions left. We're almost there. So the next question is, how can we cultivate these aspects of the feminine in ourselves? How could we do that? How can we begin cultivating these aspects that we want to bring back in? And concluding your thought on that question, and the last question is, how might we cultivate these aspects of the feminine in our communities? How might we cultivate the power and the gifts of the feminine in our communities? Okay, you can finish your thought on that question. That is our last question for now. I'm sure there's lots of other questions to consider. I'm going to stop screen share if I can figure out how to do that. Okay. So I do feel like in the Trillium Awakening path, we do a pretty good job of integrating these feminine qualities into the work. balancing the discernment of the masculine and action and boundaries and all those great things that come with the masculine energetic, with this beautiful capacity to hold and allow ourselves to really drop into our bodies and into mutuality with one another. So I see the Trillium Path as a actually profound integration of the masculine and feminine. And I feel like we're creating a culture that balances these aspects in a new way. So I hope those questions were helpful. And in closing, I'm going to read a poem by Fred Lamotte from his new book called The Fire of Darkness. Men who believe women. Men who care for women in pain. Men who praise women when their bodies grow old. Men who listen to women even if they repeat themselves. Men who hear women even if they do not speak. Men who grasp whole women with their hearts, not parts of women with their fists. Men who hug women well, radiance to radiance. Men who linger by forest ponds and gaze into the green stillness, speaking to the Great Mother. Men who travel deep into the wilderness, not to hunt or kill, not to climb the highest peak, but just to be there. Men who know valleys, observing the etiquette of mist, the customs of cedar and willow. Men who understand that the fire in their belly is the goddess. So regardless of what gender we are, may we place the divine feminine back on her throne and embrace the beautiful feminine in our psyche, souls, and bodies and communities. Thank you so much.